We're speaking with Dan Miller, who is the play-by-play voice of Detroit Lions football. And Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dan, this offseason has had so many different sort of storylines for the Lions, and I think the one that jumps out right off the bat is all of the things going on with Mikel LaSure and Nick Fairley, from getting a little bit of trouble with the law, whether it be the drinking and driving, the marijuana use. From your perspective as a guy who is with the team, is this something that Lions fans need to be concerned about? Is this an epidemic with this group, or is this something that you think is going to ultimately really not be that big of a deal?
I don't think it's something that's pervasive through the team. I think that, if you say that, then at the same time you're discounting guys like Nate Burleson and Kyle Vanden Bosch and Calvin Johnson and Rob Sims and Corey Williams, and I could go on and on and on with the good guys on this team. And so I think it's unfair to do that. Do I think it's something you have to worry about? Yeah, with those individual players, I do. I think when you have guys that are arrested multiple times, there's clearly something there that has to raise your level of concern. So, it's up to LaSure and it's up to Fairley, for lack of a better way of putting it and simplifying it greatly, to grow up and, start handling some of the responsibilities that you have, not just as a football player, but as an adult. And, I think they had better realize that, now they're really on the edge of not just missing a little bit of time, but missing a lot of time. So, for those individually, yeah, I think it's something to be concerned with. For the entire team, I don't think it's something that is running rampant through a locker room that I think is full of a lot of good guys.
Well, they haven't given up on these guys yet. I mean, reading the coach's comments, Mikel LaSure had a good mini camp. They're still excited about Nick Fairley. I mean, I think the Lions still expect big things from both of these guys, don't they?
I think they definitely do. I mean, they drafted LaSure that high for a reason. I mean, they drafted him because they have a specific role in mind for him. And, in the limited time that we've gotten to see him out on the field, he's clearly a heck of an athlete. He's a big kid. And, when he arrives, he arrives. He's pretty solidly built. And, I'm looking forward to seeing him play. I mean, obviously it's not going to be for a couple of weeks into the season now, but, Fairley was drafted in the first round for a reason as well. And they were thrilled to get him. And when you look at, he did not have, a smooth rookie season in terms of injuries, no off season. Training camp was just a rush. So, you look at what he was able to do when he was healthy. He was able to flash a little bit and show you the kind of player that he can be. Now he's got to kind of straighten that thing out and get his off the field, situation right, and get to the point where he can just go out and play. And if he can do that, then we'll get a better indication of who he is and what he is as a football player. But I know that based on some of the things that they saw last year, they're really excited about what he can do. So no, in neither case have they given up on the player. But, they can only do so much from here on out. It really is up to the player with the team's support. But it's ultimately up to the player, because you can't be with a guy 24/7. They're going to have to make some decisions and make the right decision.
Dan Miller is the sports director at Fox 2 in Detroit. He is also the play-by-play voice of the Detroit Lions since 2005. Dan, Calvin Johnson, another storyline from the offseason, a 7-year contract. He's going to be with Detroit for a long, long time. Obviously, that's got to be great news for Lions fans.
It is. I mean, you're talking about, I think if you take quarterbacks out of the equation, because they're always difficult to factor in, I think he's the best player in the league. And I think that he is somebody that just, to me, defines what a great player is, because not only does he do things himself, but he makes everybody else better. He opens up the field for Burleson and opens up the field for Titus Young, and, hopefully, when he's healthy, Broyles and Pettigrew, who's had a couple of back-to-back big seasons in terms of numbers, and Tony Scheffler, who had 6 touchdowns last year, and however they decided to deploy things at running back. Look, if you're going to drift 2 guys over to Calvin, and sometimes even a third kind of slanted in that direction, you just can't cover the whole field. And if, a guy like Javid Best can stay healthy, his explosiveness mixed with Calvin kind of slanting everything his way, there's a lot that Scott Linehan can work with there. But obviously, Matthew is a huge part of that because you have to have a quarterback. But, Calvin is worth every penny they paid for him. And, you couldn't ask for a better guy. And in my opinion, you won't find a better football player.
Man, as a play-by-play broadcaster, Calvin Johnson has got to be a dream come true for you, isn't he, Dan? I mean, how much fun is that to have the opportunity to call 16-plus games of Calvin Johnson every single year?
Oh, I mean, I think anybody would tell you if they're in this business that the opportunity to call a guy who's considered the best is, something that you don't look at or take lightly. I mean, it's the cool thing about Calvin is, and the great ones do this, he surprises us. I mean, as much as we'll sit in the booth and talk about the fact that even when he's covered, he's not covered, or Calvin's never a bad option, or, joke around, just throw it up, let him go get it. I mean, when he does it, you still sometimes can't believe it. I mean, the catch against Dallas with 3 guys around him, the catch bending over backwards against Minnesota down the left sideline, the way he brought the team back basically against Oakland. I mean, he just does things that continue to impress you and surprise you and does it with, a very humble nature and he's a credit to a football team and an organization, but more than that, he's just flat fun to watch.
And he's going to be coming to your Xbox or your PlayStation on the cover of Madden, and that just shows you really it was a fan vote. I mean, what a huge star across the country this guy's really become.
People love Flash. People love, the guys that can make the highlight plays, and people love the guys that you see on SportsCenter, and he's that guy. I mean, he's whatever, guy you want to hold up from, baseball to the NHL to the NBA. He's that NFL guy. I'm just glad that people got a chance to actually pay attention to him and see him. It was only a year ago that you had people questioning where this guy stood in terms of the better receivers in the league. And it was just, I'll never forget before last season, I sat and watched ESPN with 3 of the talking heads up there. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, that's what we do. But 3 of the guys up there, and they were asked to name the top 3 receivers. This is before last season. Not one of them named Calvin. And I just looked at the TV and I said, you guys are nuts. And you know what? I think he proved it. But you know what? It's hard when your team's bad and you're playing with, a rotating hand at quarterback. The team's finally good. He's got a stud quarterback to work with now, and now I think people can really see what he can do. And I think that's great for him because there's, it hadn't been easy, during his time in the league when there was really nothing else happening on this team and everybody just went out to stop him. And then people would ask, why didn't Calvin catch the ball? Well, because other teams know how to take one guy away if there's nothing else out there to threaten them.
Riley Reif in the first round and then Broyles in the second round. The Lions go offense with those first 2 picks in the draft. And I think, the sports talk radio universe, showed a little bit of concern about that, not really shoring up the secondary with the draft until later on. As a fan and as somebody who covers the team, what do you take away from the draft? Is it just too early to say?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there was nothing there that upset me greatly. I'll say this, and this is what I've said to people. Bentley, I know fans wanted to take quarterback. First of all, you had a chance to take a guy at a premium position in Riley Reif in the first round. And the other corners that you would look at as first-round picks were gone, unless you were willing to take the risk on Jenkins, which they clearly were not willing to do. So, left tackle's a premium position. They drafted a guy they think can ultimately play there. And Jeff Backus clearly is on, the backside of his career wherever it goes from here. So, you fortify that position and you secure yourself for the future. In the second round, I know everybody wanted to draft a corner. I understand that. But, there does have to be a point where, you have to draft a guy that you believe belongs there. And if you have a bunch of guys ahead of any of the corners, you know what? Ultimately, you got to go with your convictions and draft the guy that you think is right. Was I surprised by a receiver? Yeah, I was. But, at the end of the day, when you look at what New Orleans rolled out last year, where they had 4 guys in the tight end and all those running backs that would beat you, it's not impossible to see a role for him on this team. It's not even hard to see a role for him on this team. But what I've said to people is this. Look, if they'd have drafted Bentley in the second round, everybody would have jumped up and down and said, you know what? They solved their need. They got their cornerback. And then if they'd have drafted Broyles in the third round, I think people would have said, you know what? boy, they got great value for a guy that could have been drafted in the first round. So I think even if you just flip-flop those picks and explain it to people that way, they feel a little better about it. But, I look at this draft. They drafted multiple cornerbacks. I don't look at it as just being Bentley. There's the guy out in front. I think any one of those guys could be the guy that ends up kind of making an impression, or Aaron Berry or Alfonso Smith bounces back after what was a tough year at times last year, maybe him. But there's a lot of guys in the mix at cornerback. The question is, outside of Chris Houston, what do you have? And we'll have to wait and see. But I just think, drafts are so difficult to evaluate, and I understand positional needs and things like that, but I think sometimes it becomes too simplistic to say that they didn't draft this guy at that position or this guy at that position, and it was a bad draft. I just don't think it's that simple. And the fact is, and I know we all have to talk about this stuff right away, but truth be told, it's really a year or two down the line at least before you know what you got out of a draft. There are teams that got huge marks for the drafts this year that will look back and wish they had done some other things. So, we'll have to wait and see. And, clearly it's a lot of people's discontent was rooted in the fact that defense got torched for the second half of last year, and they have to be better. And there's no question they do have to be better. I think the belief in Allen Park is they'll be better from within, and then they like some of the guys they added as well.
You can follow Dan on Twitter at Dan Miller, Fox 2. He's a sports director at Fox 2 in Detroit and the play-by-play voice of the Detroit Lions. Cliff Averill, over 11 sacks last year, still a contract dispute there. I understand that it's part of the business. Is there a concern, Dan, and I don't understand the way the salary cap works in the NFL, but you have Calvin. You've got to pay Matthew Stafford and keep him. You're going to have to pay Ndamukong Suh going forward. Is there a concern about giving Cliff Averill this kind of money, that kind of top five defensive end money for a long-term deal, and the fact that you're going to run out of the availability to keep other players down the line? Is that part of the calculation and why this is taking so long on Cliff?
I think it's part of the calculation that you have to have when you decide how much you're going to pay him. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's completely a referendum on Cliff and saying that he's not worth, 11 or 12 million bucks a year. I do think you can't do that in a vacuum. I think some of the points you bring up, knowing some of the guys that you have to re-sign down the line, are important as well. And I think, the contract that Johnson got in Carolina and Tom Ali got in Kansas City kind of set the market, and it set the market high, and particularly the Johnson deal, which, quite frankly, a lot of people thought was an overpayment. It really skewed things. And, look, worst comes to worst, he's going to play for 10-6 this year or whatever that number is. And if he has a good year, they have the ability to franchise him again next year. Do I think that there's still a chance they could work out a long-term contract? Yeah, I think there's a chance that could happen. Absolutely. Because, as time gets closer, having a guarantee of 18 or $20 million overall might become very appealing to him. And maybe the Lions move a little bit on their number. But I just think you have to be careful when you talk about a player's value during negotiations, because so often that changes when everybody finds the number that they're happy with, or when time dictates that it's really time to get down to finding that number, and then everybody's okay. But to your point, yeah, all that stuff has to be factored in. You have to look way ahead of where you are now, 2-3 years down the line, and try to figure out, okay, how's our salary cap going to be affected by everything we do now? That's what the good general managers do. That said, teams usually find a way to get guys paid. If they need them, they find a way. And I think they have a number of good players that they're going to ultimately have to pay. And I like what Martin Mayhew said once. I'm paraphrasing, but he said that's our job, is to figure out a way to do it.
Right. Dan Miller from Fox 2 in Detroit. Dan, your thoughts on Jahvid Best coming back from the concussions last year? He's had a history of concussions stemming back to his days in college playing out at Cal, and a lot of folks have seen the video of him flipping over in the end zone and hitting his head. With the incredible focus now in the NFL on concussions, and with Jahvid having this history, Are you concerned that he might be closer to the end of his NFL career than the beginning of it? I mean, is he really one concussion away from possibly being done with football?
Yeah, I think you have to say that. I think when he misses the amount of time that he missed last year and with the number of concussions that he's had, I'm not a doctor, but I do know this. We have seen Jahvid Best knocked out by concussions. And, you know, for that reason, I think he's a guy that, and look, the NFL is difficult to count on anybody anytime because injuries can be so prevalent, but I do think that you have to look at Jahvid and say he's a wonderful talent and he can be a huge difference maker on this team. But you also have to factor in the fact that there is a great deal of uncertainty with him. And to me, he's almost play to play and game to game. And I don't say that as a negative towards him, but just as a fact of life based on what we've seen. And I hope he's okay. I hope he continues to be okay and plays out, you know, his career to its fullest, because he is an electric player who can change a game in a heartbeat. And, you know, those things like we saw on Monday night against Chicago, just big plays. I think he can be a big part of this team, but I do think, yeah, there absolutely has to be concern. And I think he's a guy that you kind of always have to, you know, do a good job of backing yourself up with to make sure that in case he can't go, you're not going to be completely taken apart by it, that you got to be ready to have somebody there just in case he's not 100% or just knocked out of a game.
Dan Miller joining us from Fox 2 in Detroit. Final thought on the squad and looking at the coaching staff led by Jim Schwartz, Martin Mayhew in the front office. I mean, Dan, this, in my view, this team has gone from being sort of disrespected from a management standpoint, being considered a very poorly run franchise by so many people around the league. And now you look at it a few years later, and Jim Schwartz is regarded as one of the better coaches in this league. Martin Mayhew is getting tremendous respect for the way that he's run this franchise. Is it amazing to you how quickly that perception has turned from 0-16 just a few years ago?
It's pretty quick, and it does, you know, winning does that. Winning changes everything. And I think if you even take it a step further and say that, you know, there were a lot of people that weren't thrilled when Martin Mayhew got that job because he was perceived, and really it was a Millen guy. You know, I remember asking Martin that day if he had to change the way that they drafted players. And he said, you know what? We've had the right guys in the right groups. We've just chosen the wrong guys. And you know what? He's done a good job of choosing the right guys. I think he's made numerous shrewd trades for guys like Rob Williams and Tony Scheffler and Chris Houston that have come in and helped this team. And Rob Sims, another guy. And I think he'll continue to do that. So, you know, people asked me when this changeover happened, how long it would take to get things turned around. I said, you don't know. There is no one move. There is nothing that you snap your fingers and it happens. But what has to happen is you make a series of good decisions. And once you've made enough of them, you look up and you say, you know what? We're pretty good. This thing's working out. And nobody's perfect. You're going to make some bad decisions and mistakes. And that happens everywhere. But you have to make a series of good decisions that puts you finally at a point where you can look down and say, you know what, this roster's pretty darn good. And they've made enough good decisions now, more than enough good decisions where they can look down and say, you know what, this roster's good, they're talented, they have expectations, they should contend, they shouldn't back down to anybody. But it goes on. It's ever changing, because of injuries and age and things like that. You just got to keep moving in the right direction. And, I think these guys have done a great job. They'd be the first to tell you, still not having won a playoff game and obviously not having won a Super Bowl, they're not where they want to be. There's a lot left to do.
Last thing, and I'll let you go. Dan Miller from Fox 2 in Detroit. I really appreciate the conversation. Love talking Lion football in June. It's about as good as it gets. Working with Jim Brandstatter and the chemistry you guys have, I mean, that guy amazes me. Doing a Michigan game on Saturday and then hooking up with you wherever the Lions happen to be for the game on Sunday. You guys, sometimes I can feel your pain coming through the radio, or your enthusiasm or your excitement. I mean, as a broadcaster for an NFL football team, where do you strike that balance between being a fan and just trying to be an objective sort of commentator on what you're seeing? Is that a tough balance to strike, and how have you kind of managed to get there?
For me, it's not tough. And let me say this. Let me say a couple things. Number one, Brandy's great. I think he is as good as, if not better, than anybody in the NFL. And you flip around satellite radio and listen to some of the color guys, nothing against them, but Brandy stands up against anybody. He's just really good. From my point of view, he has fun. He goes wherever I want to go. He listens to what I'm saying, and hopefully I listen to what he's saying most of the time. And that's important because, I always say there's three things that can happen in a booth. You can completely be awful. You can be good and he can be good, but you're doing your own thing, or you can mesh together. And I think he and I hopefully mesh together. At least that's the way it feels to us. But as far as the balance between being a fan and whatever else you want to call us, journalist, I have not been one. I don't believe in that once you become a journalist or a person in a news organization that you can stop rooting for teams or you have to stop rooting for teams. I think that's garbage. I've had that argument with a lot of people. Here's the thing. Be right and be fair. And if it's black, it's black. If it's white, it's white. And tell people what it is. And most of the time it's somewhere in between with shades of gray. And I think that, I think if you've listened to what we've done, we'll tell you when things are bad. And if you want to say, oh, they're homers, yeah, we are. We're rooting for the home team. And I think anybody who listens to a home broadcast would want to hear that. But at the same time, what they expect of you, and I think what's fair to ask of you is, tell the truth. Don't paint everything. That's the one thing that hacks me off when I listen to guys, is when they try to make, excuses for a team or, just ignore something bad. I see that all the time because I'll flip around and I have the packages and things like that. I'll see home team announcers. There's something clearly bad and they just choose to ignore it. They'll go silent. It's like, we won't do that. I mean, we'll tell you if it's bad. We'll root for it to get good, but we'll tell you when it's bad. So you know what? I'll leave the booth at the end of the game. I'll know that, yes, I was cheering for the home team, but I'll also know that I told people when the home team didn't do something right. And that's, to me, that's doing your job. And I didn't get into this business to stop rooting for teams. I didn't get into this business to all of a sudden not care who won or lost. I'm in this business because I grew up caring about who won or lost. And it always amazes me that people can say, oh, I don't root for anybody anymore. I just want to see the game and I'm right down there. That's garbage. Well, you're losing half of what makes this thing great. And that's having a rooting interest in a game. So, that's my long-winded answer to the question, but that's one that's always been a hot button with me. And trust me, I've had this argument over steaks, beers, hot dogs, press boxes, everywhere else with people. And some people agree and some people don't. And you know what? To each his own. We all kind of carve our own path here in this career and more power to everybody and more success to them and do it your way.
Well, the season that you guys put together last year, those incredibly close games, the exciting moments, don't change a thing. Dan Miller from Fox 2 in Detroit, and you can hear him each and every Sunday right here calling Lions right on the radio with Jim Bradstatter. Dan, I can't thank you enough for the time. I love talking football with you. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.